Hi, I'm Brendan Mills and welcome to Lucky Episode 13 of Finance Coach TV. You and your business's finance coach. So in today's episode, we're going to look at the second component of what makes up your profit and loss. So in the previous episode, we looked at revenue, which is the first component of your profit and loss statement. In today's episode, we're going to look at your expenses. And again, I think we're all pretty familiar with what an expense is, same way with revenue. It's something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis and we're pretty comfortable with what it means. But just for completeness, I think it's really important that we tick off on a couple of things and make sure that you're fully versed in those areas. So, we're ready for another techno accounting jargon phrase as to what an expense item is. So let's have a look at it. An expense is an outflow in cash or increase in liabilities in return for a product or service. So, what's the best way to describe it? You give me something, I pay you either now or later in return for doing that. Whether it's as active service or you provide me a hard, tangible product. So like the example I used previously, a men's business shirt. I pay, I exchange cash, and I get the shirt. Or I could pay for it at a later date. So remember in the revenue section we talked about, when revenue is incurred is actually when the invoice is generated or produced without going down the legal path. But from our perspective, it's when the invoice is produced. It's the same thing from an expense perspective. So when the actual work is done, when the invoice is produced and received by us, that's actually when the expense is incurred, not necessarily when we pay for it. So let's go through a few examples of what expenses are. First of all, purchase of products or materials. So if you're running a construction business, you don't sell wood, but you sell the houses, but you need the wood to build the house. So that's an example there. Or using my business shirt example, more often than not, you're going to purchase that business shirt from somewhere else who's manufactured it, and you then on-sell it to the customer, but you've got to purchase that shirt to start with. Wages and salaries, for the vast majority of businesses, their biggest expense, and also their biggest headache, but also their most important expense. So wages and salaries that you pay to people in exchange for their service of their expertise, their time, their talents. And also sometimes they're whinging, but we won't go into that side. Your rent, if you've got a property that you need to rent to run your business out of, that's again another example of an expense. And look, the reality is there's lots of other expenses, and we're going to go through this in a couple of weeks' time, about how many expenses and how do you need to actually show them within your business. Because the reality is businesses often have hundreds of different accounts in terms of telephones and things like that. You don't need to list them all on your profit and loss. It's really important to get the key items there and break them down in a way that is meaningful rather than just ending up with a big pile of lines and numbers, which doesn't add too much value to you as a business owner or to you as a manager or an employee trying to understand and decipher this information. So again, pretty straightforward. Going through the examples of what an expense is, make sure you've got an understanding of that. Remember that it becomes an expense as soon as someone delivers the service or the invoice is provided. Again, without going down the legal side of things, but that's important to understand. It's not when we pay it, it's actually when the obligation to pay it commences. So, and the vast majority of expenses in business aren't actually paid as at the point in time. They're paid at a later date. So, some examples there, remember that. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.